Hello and welcome to Higher Ed Live. It's the live weekly web show about the world of higher education. We're all about digital development, professional empowerment, bringing you guys conversations about the world of higher education from here to there. Tonight's conversation is Ed Tech Roundup. I am coming to you live from the Milliard of Southern New Hampshire University here in Manchester, New Hampshire. A little dark. The lights on some sensors may come on, may come off. We'll do what we can about that. A little late night here. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm so excited to bring on our guests and have a conversation all about what's going on in the world of ed tech, both because I have a lot to say about it, but more importantly, I have a lot to learn about it because I have been working like crazy, a little bit under a rock, and I need to know what's going on. I've been kind of catching the surface level a lot of stories. I want to drill down a little bit, see what is hot, see what's not, see what's on your mind. So as always, hashtag is Higher Ed Live. But first, let's thank the sponsors that make this show possible. We are sponsored, speaking of EdTech, at the folks at Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. It's a private Facebook community to boost enrollment and retention. They have a cool new white paper out on recruiting international students with social media. Interesting conversation. I haven't had too much before, so definitely check it out. It's an interesting one to consider. We're also sponsored by Omni Update, the leading web content management system CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS, it's called OU Campus. It's secure, scalable, great tools, features, deployment flexibility, and awesome user community. These guys are the biggest in the business for a reason. Check out Vanderbilt U's School of Engineering site that just launched, powered by Omni Update. Great example of what it can do. We are also sponsored by Scavenger, a Google-funded mobile game about going places, doing challenges, and earning points. If you're attending NACAC, and a lot of you in higher ed are, definitely check out what they have going on. We got a link out. Don't miss out on enjoying Scavenger at that conference and meeting up with the fine folks from their team. And finally, Converge Consulting, a measurable multi-channel marketing firm that helps clients like you in higher ed strategize, execute, and analyze their marketing efforts. They have some great Google Analytics workshops coming up. The fact is, guys, Converge help people do what they do better with data as the focus. Definitely check out what they're doing as well. And with that is the sponsors plug. Let's dive right into today's show. So I'm going to bring on one of my all-time favorite guests. Always wonderful to have her on. It's been a little bit too long, which is why I wanted to welcome her back. So welcome tonight's guest, Audrey Waters from Hack Education, blogs for Inside Higher Ed. You're kind of all over the ed tech space lately. So Audrey, welcome back to Higher Ed Live.
Hey, thanks for having me, Seth. This is great. I love coming on the show. This will be fun.
Yeah, I'm always looking forward to it. Just so folks know, it's not just ed tech. We had a whole great craft beer chat right before we came on. So
this was almost all about IPAs, but
it almost was an IPA Live. We'll be launching that next week. We'll do an hour-long special. But in the meantime, we're talking all about EdTech tonight instead. So as I said, guys, I've been working kind of like crazy a little bit lately, and I've been missing a lot of stories, and I'm following a little bit on the surface, reading the headlines, and I wanted Audrey to come on to weigh in to let me know where am I right, where am I wrong, where do I need to do a little bit more research. So the first conversation that I want to bring up is we've talked about this before on the show with MOOCs, massively open online courses, but specifically Coursera. I've been following, obviously, that 17 more universities signed on with Coursera, and it just seems that, especially in the mainstream media, but even a lot of the higher ed publications, like Coursera is like the buzzword for the fall right now, going for your back-to-school season. It is all Coursera, and I don't know, for me on the surface, sometimes it feels like maybe it's just like the easy in for schools that haven't figured out what they want to do with technology yet. But I don't know, what are your thoughts, Audrey, on Coursera right now and on the level of media coverage that they've been getting?
I would say, I would definitely agree that MOOCs in general are certainly like the buzzword right now in higher ed. I think it's very difficult to even look at the Chronicle of Higher Education on any given day and not find at least one story on MOOCs. Is there cheating in MOOCs? Are we going to be, how is this going to change remedial education? How is this going to change business models of schools? How are professors going to sell their textbooks? I mean, seems to be really what's captivating the news media, at least. I think the reality of MOOCs feels a little bit different to me. And in fact, I would actually say that this isn't just a matter of universities that aren't sure what to do about their strategy for technology. I actually think we're seeing a lot of universities join the Coursera platform in particular who already have online, who offer online classes, who might be doing other innovative things around teaching with technology, whether it's sort of campus-based or sort of more broadly speaking on the web. What's fascinating to me is that right now it seems as though every university wants to be in on the Coursera bandwagon, whether or not they have other things going on their own campuses, other online initiatives. I mean, I think even Stanford is a great example of that. Stanford has lots of things going on in terms of technology and education, and I think many of these other schools do as well. But no one wants to miss out.
Yeah, and the Stanford one is such an interesting one I want to talk about because I've read a couple articles on this and I was interested and I couldn't tell if what Stanford's doing is brilliant or just really, really confused. I mean, they're doing Coursera, obviously, which it was started by one of their former professors. It's also, they have a thing called Class to Go. They also have 16 new online classes that they're offering, and they basically said, at least the one article I read, was that, like, they're doing all these different things, sort of like hedge their bets because they don't know what the future is going to hold yet. So I guess their thoughts are they can learn more by trying more, and in a way, I totally think that's brilliant. But in the other way, it's kind of like it just seems scatterbrained to be like we're trying 3 different delivery models at the same exact time, and we're just going to see which one hits. It feels a little bit like Vegas. Are we just like going to like cover half the table and hope the number comes up? I don't know.
I mean, I think that this is not to sort of pick on, the higher education institutions, but I think in some ways this is par for the course with how decisions happen all the time on campuses. I mean, you'd find the biology department sort of going down one road and another department sort of several buildings over recreating that very same wheel. I mean, I don't think it's actually new or news that universities don't plan things sort of in a cohesive manner. Different departments, different faculty take on projects, and sort of the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I think that I couldn't help but think about Virginia Tech, which of course had its big kerfuffle over the summer with the firing of President Sullivan, and the Board of Visitors felt as though the university wasn't doing enough in terms of sort of hopping on the MOOC bandwagon, when in reality, the university was doing a lot of very innovative things around using technology for teaching and learning. So I just think in some ways it's just the sort of institutional, these sort of academic disciplinary barriers that we have already that, folks in the art history department probably aren't up to speed with what tools they're using over in the math building. And I don't think that's sort of, I think that's just sort of the way in which campuses tend to work.
I definitely think the University of Virginia was a really interesting point because it really is interesting how, again, reading in on that and the board members' feelings and how things went, that it seemed like this big gap in what people really thought we should be doing with the future of technology, especially from a university that large. And it seemed that a lot of them really weren't sure, or I felt to me that some of them were really giving like something like a Coursera, like a golden ticket. And so I guess here's my question is like, and I don't know if this even makes sense. Like, what's the problem you think that things like Coursera and MOOCs are solving? Like, is it about access? Is it about making it affordable since college is so expensive now? Like who are they educating, and what's the problem that they're actually solving by offering these?
I mean, I think that you could certainly the argument would be, of course, that this is a matter of access, right? The MOOC stands for Massive Open Online Course. The open being open enrollment, right? Anybody with web access can sign up and take these courses and take them for free. So it does ostensibly address this question of access to a university level education, and takes a stab at the rising cost of tuition. But I'm not sure that that's necessarily all that we're seeing happen. I mean, and certainly that if that's what you believe, then MOOCs really do look like something that might sort of drive a stake into the heart of traditional, on-campus education. If you can get a world-class education online for free, why the hell would you want to go into a bunch of debt, to attend a school? But I'm not sure that that's necessarily what's happening with a lot of these classes. And in some ways, they feel very much like a marketing effort for universities, and not just, here, take a sample class at Princeton and then later, you can buy your whole degree at Princeton. But it's a marketing effort that, hey, our university is part of this cutting edge, leading edge technology change. We're ready, we're ready for the internet. We're ready to sort of rethink what these institutions look like in the future. So it's almost like a message. It's a marketing message around the institution of higher ed, not necessarily how do you recruit more students to your residential campus program.
I think that's a really interesting point. So here's my question that I guess I haven't had answered yet either. Coursera's, correct me if I'm wrong, a for-profit company, but
right.
But the education is going to be free. Is that the case forever? I mean, assuming it's a for-profit, sooner or later they're going to want to make a profit. So schools, I mean, it's not like it's new that schools have partnered with for-profit companies. They've done that in online education since the 90s. Tons of companies will go out and offer these branches. But have they mentioned anything about like where the profit's going to come from? Because I mean, how does it stay open? I guess advertising is the only thing I can think of. Like, how do they make money if they want to really keep it open and free?
I think this is really unclear, and I think I think that there are lots of reasons why this is something I think that should give. This isn't just a matter of Coursera, but sort of education technology in general. Right now, we're seeing a huge flood of investment into the sector, and it's not always clear where the revenue is going to come from, particularly when tools like Coursera are free. I think that there are lots of potential ways in which Coursera can make money. They could certainly sell student data, right? They could certainly be part of a recruiting pipeline. I mean, that's something that Udacity, which was another of these MOOC startups that grew out of Stanford, that's certainly what it's looking at. Sort of how do you match students with, in the case of Udacity, technology companies that are looking for well-trained software engineers. So I think that there are. I can't imagine advertising being too successful of a revenue model. But I think that there are. I think that that's a gray area that it's not really clear. I think Daphne Kohler, one of the co-founders, said, that still the investors assure her that if you do the right thing, the money will come. To me, that feels a little naive. I'm not sure that that's the case.
And I wonder if it makes me concerned too for the institutions that are signing up and giving away this content for free without really having an answer to that. Again, because I don't have information on a contract. I'll be honest, I'd love to get my hands on a Coursera contract, but I know that a lot of for-profit companies that do come in and offer online education require contracts that are 5 to 7 years in length or more. So like, how long are schools locking in this content, and what are the rights? By the way, is that a conversation that's going on at all? I haven't seen any coverage of that, and maybe I'm just missing that part of the conversation.
Story in the Chronicle earlier this summer about, and I think that that's really something important for professors to think about. And I would say that as much as some of these institutions are sort of driving the conversation of joining Coursera, this is very much something that professors are interested in as well. Professors who are sort of like the idea of being able to teach not just students in the lecture hall, but have tens of thousands of students take your class. I think appeals to. It certainly appeals, I think, to the ego of many professors. But I think that this question of who owns this content, right? So do the professors have ownership of it? This is like, all of these sort of work for hire questions that academic institutions often grapple with. If a professor teaches a class from the University of Michigan and then they move to the University of Chicago, what happens to that Coursera class? Does it remain University of Michigan content? It's I haven't seen some of these contracts either, but lots of questions there about how we handle intellectual property. Because although the open part of MOOCs isn't about open educational resources, it's definitely just about letting people in for free.
And my last question or conversation point about MOOCs before we move on to a couple other big things that have been in the news is one issue people have probably heard me talk about before on the show is who are we educating with these things? And I'm a big believer that a degree is still incredibly important, and that saying you got an online certificate is not going to mean the same thing. And right now, like it or not, accrediting bodies still have massive sway because employers still look for degrees. And so long as, I think it's 70% of current open jobs require some form of post-secondary education, as long as they do and they don't think certificates count for that, it's still there's a big gap between why people go back to school. Again, not everyone goes back to school for jobs by any means, but it is a really big way for people to excel their careers and better their lives. And that seems to be this missing gap still, is how do you get a real degree? How do you get a bachelor's or, even, at least an associate or something from this? And one thing that was interesting, which I definitely caught and thought a lot about, was that there was a story that Colorado State University's global campus is now going to be taking credit for a Udacity course. And I got a little bit of Twitter debate with people talking about whether or not this was a big deal. And in one capacity, I think it's pretty groundbreaking. I mean, there's someone offering credit for this kind of free online course. But at the same time, the article was about how three faculty members reviewed the entire course, including every week's assignments and everything. And for folks in higher ed know that a lot of times when you have affiliation agreements, essentially saying you'll agree to take credits, I mean, it's not like every time a transfer student comes in, you look at every homework assignment from all 60 credits. There's a reason you have accrediting bodies, because you agree to take credits from certain regional accreditations and stuff. So I don't know if you saw that story. I mean, what are your thoughts on getting actual credits towards a degree, and is this a big step that there is one institution in one example offering credits for a Udacity course?
I think that this is a big deal, and I actually think that this is something that's probably coming not just from Udacity. They recently partnered with Pearson, so that they'll be offering, you can actually take your final exam through Pearson, on-site facilities in Pearson's testing centers. So I do think we're going to start seeing credits. Students will pay for some sort of credit from these things. But to back up to your question about who's taking these classes, to me, this is the really interesting piece. I saw some statistics last week from MITx, from MIT's MOOC, that MIT offered circuits and electronics, which is one of their required classes for computer science and electrical engineering students. And they did sort of a rough sort of survey of the participants, and they found that something like 70 or 80% of the folks who completed the survey, who signed up for the class, had already taken a comparable class at their own university. And based on my experiences as well, that feels about right. I sit in a lot of these MOOCs, I try a lot of these MOOCs, and I find a lot of the participants have already taken a class like this before. So it seems like it's serving, and that's not a bad thing, but it does seem like it's in serving a bunch of different purposes depending on the students. There are many students take these from overseas. I think Brazil, India are sites where are areas where a lot of these enrollments come from. So I think that that's a different sort of student population than folks who sign up because they're interested in it. Folks who already have sort of academic backgrounds in it. I think that the MOOCs seem to be serving a lot of different purposes for students, and that makes it very challenging, I think, for a professor to even know how to sort of teach. How do you sort of teach a class where you have such a wide range of students participating there for such different purposes?
And with different students and different needs offers a huge problem too with them just completion rates and getting students through and understanding. I mean, that's at SNSU, we have huge conversations about student needs coming in and understanding where they are, and that's a huge hurdle of a problem to try and tackle and understand where you can provide students help to make sure they can complete those goals.
I feel like that's really a place where the MOOCs right now are stumbling, because I don't think that I think that we, on campus, or not even on campus, but a traditional college class really oftentimes doesn't do a good job of supporting students who are struggling. And in these MOOCs, I feel like there are students who are struggling, and they aren't necessarily getting directions. They're not getting peer support. There's not a TA that you can go to. You can't stop by the professor's office hours and ask for clarification. So I think that I think that they really work well if you're a motivated student with some background already in the topic. If you have language issues or if you aren't certain, I think that you really, despite having tens of thousands of students taking the class with you, you're really learning alone. And I think that that's really overwhelming and not necessarily great support for students to.
Absolutely agree. So shifting gears a little bit, this is kind of in the same vein. Maybe I'm just a little paranoid. Totally possible. Is there a sense or a feeling, do you think, that we're starting to sort of outsource education to private companies? Like, are we, again, private companies have been involved in higher ed forever, obviously. There's always roles for them. But I don't know, I have this little concern as, like, are we outsourcing, like, our future? Like, okay, who's going to get us past these hurdles and help us solve these next problems? Are we simply outsourcing that, do you think? Or do you think there's still, a lot of examples where that's not happening? And if it is happening, is that even a problem, or is this something that's acceptable and will the market kind of help support and drag our sometimes archaic industry forward?
I worry about this a lot. I mean, and I think we've seen both at the higher ed level and certainly at the K through 12 level, budget cuts after budget cuts after budget cuts for the funding of public education. I think that, I mean, in some ways that's sort of the reason that, the burden for the increasing cost of college is in part because it's being shifted onto students themselves to pay for things. And I do see right now private companies really sort of eyeing the situation, and I sort of have a lot of concern for public institutions being outsourced to private companies. I mean, over the summer, the California, I think it was the California State University system, announced that they would be moving an online portal or an online platform. And rather than building it in-house or relying, on the different universities and the sort of local expertise, they handed it off to Pearson. So Pearson will be responsible for the California State University system's online education program. To me, that feels like a really sort of taking sort of local expertise, the sort of the things that sort of academic institutions already do well, perhaps that they need some more support, and hand it over to a for-profit company. I think definitely something that we're, particularly as we see Silicon Valley really throwing money at ed tech, I think we're going to see more and more.
And when we look more and more at where these private companies are, one thing we have is obviously a boom in ed tech startup companies in general, it seems. So what are your thoughts on where funding is at right now? And I'll say, I'm not someone who's into VC funding and tracks a lot. I get my EdSurge weekly email and I'll read some stuff, and I know in your blog you kind of list where things are going, but I have no context for this. As an outsider, we keep getting told, or I keep getting told when I read things, that the funding is going crazy, that this is just totally been changing. What are your thoughts on kind of funding for ed tech startups? Are we out of control? I mean, how many players are there? And I mean, we're talking about some pretty big money, it seems.
We are talking about big money, and I think on one hand, it's exciting right now to see a number of, the sort of growing number of startups want to enter the education space and want to do something innovative. So despite my sort of previous comments about concerns about this move of dollars away from the public sphere to the private, to for-profit companies, I do think it's great to see people who are willing to take on and do education startups, because I think that education is it's a tricky area. It's not that any startup is easy, but it's certainly there are sort of lots of challenges, lots of stakeholders, and lots of obstacles to sort of be successful as a startup. But certainly the amount of money that we're seeing go into the space, particularly without clear revenue models, business plans in a lot of cases, it does give me concern. And thinking about sort of where are people going to make money, sort of this question about, making money off of individuals' data, which is sort of what we're seeing with Facebook, what we're seeing with LinkedIn, a lot of these sort of the rise of the social social networks, they make money by selling user data, selling advertising, selling data. And so is this a model that we want to see applied to education? I think that should give us some pause. Yeah, tons of money right now in ed tech, that's for sure. Big money for companies that don't necessarily have any sort of revenue plan.
So taking that conversation a step further, you recently kind of ventured into, I guess, the belly of the beast of EdTech. I went to San Francisco. You wrote a really, awesome post about TechCrunch Disrupt. What are your general thoughts on where the conversation is in the general tech sphere, at least from someone who just went in, was at an event like that, and kind of hearing people, I don't know if it was pontificating, but there's some big talk, it seemed, at that event that you were at.
I think this is one of the things that sort of drives me crazy about ed tech right now, because I feel as though Silicon Valley is so sort of decided that this is something hot, this is something that investors and entrepreneurs are interested in, and they're really interested in sort of in the business of education and the business of education technology, and sort of we forget to ask questions about sort of teaching and learning, and how does this actually sort of are we sort of helping students have more access to information? Are we actually sort of making a difference in terms of the questions about what we're learning and how? So a lot of fixation on disruption and revolution, and this is going to change everything, and actually sort of very little talk on how people learn, how people teach. They sort of seem like very separate spheres. Certainly, and I think too that I would add to that there's a lot of hostility towards the institution of education, both at the K-12 level and in higher ed. Sort of this assumption that anybody who works in higher ed is somehow not interested in change. Everybody who works in education is somehow a Luddite, and that we need a bunch of engineers, technology engineers, to come in and sort of twist the dials, and then magically it's going to get magically this broken system is going to be better thanks to re-engineering. Rather than actually talking to teachers, talking to professors, talking to students, talking to, God forbid, instructional designers, and sort of have smart conversations about what's right and wrong with how we teach and learn today.
It brings up, I guess, my next question too. Then we talk about this separation of conversations, because I've definitely noticed that too. I mean, I read TechCrunch and they have their view of things, and then I read EdSurge, like the weekly newsletter, which I guess is going to be more than that, where they have their kind of really bulleted point stuff, and then obviously I read your blog, which is one of the few that I think, only one I can think of, that long form covers this stuff consistently. I mean, we see the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed cover things, but I've literally been told from an editor, one of those two institutions, I won't say which, that basically if they cover your company, they're more or less not going to cover you again for a year, unless you're like a big name that everyone wants to hear about. They're not in the business of like spending all this time like educating on, here's the tool you don't know, here's how you can use it, here's how it's changed since 3 months from now and stuff. And that's a bit unfortunate. So what are your thoughts on where the ed tech news coverage is? Because it seems like we're in a weird space right now where there's a lot of surface level conversations, and in a way I guess it's good that the New York Times is writing articles on Coursera and things like that, but I'm still not seeing, like I said, where are these conversations happening, and how can we connect these conversations that these individuals on different campuses are having with the media that's supposed to be providing them this platform of information and a chance for real dialogue?
I mean, this is one of the things that drives crazy all the time, particularly, I mean, when I look at some of the coverage that occurs, particularly in tech blogs, that just strike me as being, ludicrous. I don't think that we do a very good job, or I should say, I think that a lot of what happens in the technology blogs is really just marketing. There's not a lot of in-depth journalism. You get a press release that says, hey, we have a new app. Hey, we raised some money. Hey, we moved the button on that one corner to the other corner. And that's sort of the story that appears in TechCrunch and other blogs like that. I don't think that there's a lot of really in-depth coverage about what are the implications, how does it sort of fit into a larger context in the education of what people are using now, how processes work now, policy, research, learning, cognitive science, all of those other issues. To have a more nuanced conversation, I think it's very much marketing. It's just sort of marketing for these companies. To just woohoo, we raised $7 million, be prepared for education disruption.
Couldn't agree more, and I think it's a frustrating thing for me, especially because also I'll say, as someone myself who tries to seek this stuff out, it's hard to find the right information. You find a lot about press releases and not a lot about, I'm a professor that used this tool, here's my thoughts, or here's an in-depth look. I mean, folks know I've championed a few companies on the show, whether or not I should, heck, if I have a chance to do it, I will. But this one's like, again, you have your room sync in Florida, which is like a roommate matching Facebook tool, and they're starting to see early data that students that can self-select roommates via social media actually perform better in school. And it's weird things like that that's really amazing. That's a cool power of some new technology, and just doesn't get the coverage I think that it should. So my question, next one to you then, this is mostly just for my own purposes, but I hope folks watching care too, is where do you get your news? Because I get mine from you. So where do you get yours? Not that I'm going to bypass you and go straight to the source or anything, I promise. I'm a hack education reader either way, but just curious.
I spend a lot of time, this kills me to say this because right now I'm so angry at this company. Steam is coming out my ears. But I get a lot of my news from Twitter. So I follow a lot of educators. I follow a lot of K-12 educators, professors. I'm in a variety of disciplines. I look and see what they're using. I look to see what their problems are. It sort of gives me a better sense of when a company says that they're solving a problem that I know is actually nobody's problem, which happens quite often. That people come up with magical solutions for a pain that maybe one engineer in their life has ever felt. But I talk to a lot of companies. I get companies that I sort of hop on the phone with, and I find myself, rather than we sort of end up having almost sort of philosophical discussions about sort of learning theory and teaching and stuff. And I really think a lot before I write up a company. I'm not interested in being the marketing arm of anybody's company, even companies that I like. I'm resistant to that. But I really don't want to be a cheerleader for ed tech. I feel like we've got decades and decades of using technology in the classroom now. I don't think we need cheerleaders. I think we actually need thoughtful, nuanced, sort of critical coverage. And I think we need to sort of, we need to push back on some of these companies that are building things that aren't in the service of users, that aren't good for learners, that seem to be exploitative, that just aren't working well. Because I think that, particularly when it comes to things that sort of administrations choose and sort of force on to students. I mean, the learning management system is a great example. I think we've put up with, shoddy ed tech for far too long. And so I'm not really interested in sort of cheerleading more crap. I'd like to be more, I'd like to sort of push back. I mean, I love talking to startups. I don't want startups to be afraid to talk to me, but I'm really not interested in sort of just applauding everybody. It's not you. I mean, everyone doesn't get a gold star just because you started an education startup.
I think that's some real talk, but I love it. That's why I absolutely love having you on the show, because I definitely agree with that. Let's mention one thing. Let's go farther into it. Talk about learning management systems. Obviously, one of the biggest, often enterprise systems forced upon educators. What are your thoughts on the science? Are you seeing any change? Are we seeing, companies like a Canvas eating into a Blackboard at all, or is Blackboard still doing just fine and going to be holding its ground? It's part of a bigger question I have, I think, which is, are big tech players like a Blackboard being disrupted by these smaller companies? Has that happened yet, or are we still kind of waiting to see if those moments are going to arise?
Really interesting to me. Every year for the past couple of years, I've asked teachers, and of course this isn't a scientific survey. I sort of post to Twitter, post on my blog, onto Facebook and Google, and I ask, what are you most looking forward to taking back into the classroom with me? And for the past 2 years, not surprisingly, it's been iPads. And this year, structure was the number one, or was the most common answer, which really was shocking to me, because I can't say I've ever heard in my life, one single time ever, someone say that they were looking forward to using a learning management system. I mean, usually a learning management system, just the phrase comes with a bunch of expletives and eye rolling and, people wishing that they had other options. So I do think that Instructure seems to be winning over a lot of, customers as well, who like more. It's sort of a more up to date Web 2.0-ish. For me, I'm less interested in learning management systems as a rule, and thinking about how can we sort of weave together a variety of technologies, and how can we sort of recognize the places where learners are creating and learning on their own learning management system. So, I mean, I'm a fan of web. I'm behind closed doors.
So my next question for you, since we're talking about EdTech Roundup, covering up all things EdTech that's been going on lately, you've been traveling a lot, going to a lot of events, speaking a lot, doing all sorts of stuff. I've been kind of under a rock working on trying to get my MBA and juggle a job and some other things. What are some stories that are still resonating with you or that float to the top when you think about it over the past, I don't know, month, few weeks, or else? Are there any stories that you think people like me might have missed that we should really be taking note of right now? Because obviously if we look at the big boys are just telling us Coursera's got 17 more, but I have to think there's some other stories out there that maybe I've missed a little bit.
I think that folks need to be paying attention to what's happening with Twitter right now. And on one hand, this doesn't sound like an education story, but I think that there are many ways we should be learning from what's happening with Twitter. Of course, this is a company that has raised a lot of venture capital. I think hundreds of millions of dollars, and a company that, as I was saying earlier, with many ed tech companies, figure out how to make money. And I think that this is what happens with venture capital, right? Investors don't sort of write you a check, actually, investment. And I think we're seeing now Twitter really bend to the will of its investors and start doing some practices that are lots of practices good for developers on the ecosystem and for users. And although, on one hand, that has sort of nothing to do with education, you can see a lot of people have really taken to Twitter to develop their own personal learning networks. There are lots of Twitter, lots of teachers that use Twitter to communicate with their classes, schools that use it to sort of have social media outreach for applicants. And I think that it's sort of a cautionary tale of what happens when a site that's really relies on user-generated content and third-party developers, what happens when they start cracking down on that, and sort of the open ecosystem starts to look more and more closed. So I think that what's going to happen with Twitter, we're going to see play out in multiple other companies as well. I think that we're going to see the sort of bubble that we're experiencing right now, this exuberance with investment in education. I don't think it can go on forever if there's not actually a return on investment for those investors. And so I think that there are some dark not to sort of invoke Game of Thrones here, but winter is coming, and I think that there are some dark clouds on the horizon when it comes to all sorts of applications that we like right now. And I think that when we think about, particularly when we think about education, open access, openly licensed materials for free on the web, sort of the great promise of the web. I think we need to be really careful about the places where we see power and data and being siloed and monetized. And I think Twitter is certainly an example of that right now.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think it's definitely a really fair point. And I like you said, winter might be coming. I don't know. It's interesting. I do wonder if something like that could happen at Twitter. I mean, in a way, I guess it's not to be expected, but it's understood. And if that's the case, like you said, is this going to be really the only example of it? Or is this really going to be something that we're going to see as more and more folks are trying to figure out how can we make money and how can we do this? And it goes back to big ed tech startups too. Same thing. Once you get your big following, your big audience, you get your students in the door, but you're not making money off them. How is that going to work? Because, a lot of the companies in the past that have done so well using technology, are the ones that are making money off of it. And it's a different beast. It's interesting. I really do think you're right. And I wonder, it makes you wonder how, who do you choose to get in bed with as an institution too? Do you get in bed with a startup that isn't turning a profit yet and you don't know what they're going to do in a couple of years when the board is really pushing them to make some changes? When you're paying money, maybe this is a fallacy too, you'd think a lot of times that the customer is right. They have a little bit more leverage because you're paying for something. But when you're not, or it's a freemium model for now, I think, a lot can change. I'm curious where it would go.
I mean, and I think that, I do think that this is going to be something that'll be really interesting to play out. I mean, I think that one of the great things that we've seen, particularly for ed tech, is that we've seen an explosion in applications that go directly to the user, that they aren't just sold to the institution. Sort of that the old business model for ed tech was that you'd sell to institutions. The learning management system is the perfect example. So things go directly to consumers now. We have the option to decide. And so, but figuring out the business model around selling. You get student users. Students aren't necessarily buying things, and so don't know. I don't think we've sort of figured out the business model yet for some of these consumer technologies that we've all adopted without necessarily thinking about data ownership, data portability, and these sorts of questions. And so I think that it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future.
So shifting gears a little bit, but talking about figuring out how to make a profit. I'm curious what you see has been going on with textbooks and ebooks lately. Kind of one conversation in this world, and one reason I mention this is because there's actually an article in the Chronicle recently about how big publishers think they can make big money off of MOOCs, and that might be what saves them moving forward, is these open online courses that require traditional textbooks. I was curious. I mean, that's an issue here. We work with Flat World a lot, doing a lot of things to try and get free books to students. But what do you see going on there outside of the massively open online courses? It seems that ebooks and textbooks is still like that other big go-to conversation that you can easily have when it comes to tech and education.
Yeah, to me, this is a really interesting one. I mean, I think that this is a great example too of how I think we need to pay more attention to students' needs, to professors' needs, and then these institutional needs as well. I mean, and then the publishers as well. Students really don't seem all that excited about digital textbooks, despite all of the promise and the hullabaloo, and everyone's saying that sort of getting your textbook on your iPad is going to revolutionize how you study. Students aren't that thrilled. I mean, I think part of it is that they remain incredibly expensive, and the ways in which students have sort of worked around the cost of textbooks by buying used copies, by sharing them, by sort of reading in the library, by buying older versions, by selling them back at the end of term. Those options aren't actually open to you once you move to digital textbooks. In fact, I think a professor earlier this summer applied for a patent so that you actually, to make it, he tried to patent the idea of of making it so that you couldn't share textbooks. And so I think that digital textbooks remain something that students are very, very suspicious about, even though supposedly it's easier to highlight in them. Supposedly you can they gather up the notes and make it easier for you to have sort of flashcards to read for the finals. I mean, they really aren't, students don't seem interested. So there have been some moves to get more open educational resources out there, which of course addresses some of this question of the cost. But again, we're running into all sorts of questions about sort of who gets to choose. Do professors have a wide students' options? The trend that I'm seeing that concerns me is I'm seeing several universities start to bundle textbook costs with tuition, and it ostensibly means that every student will actually be guaranteed to have a copy of the textbook for the classes they sign up for, but it really does take away students' choice in making the decision, for better or for worse, to not buy a textbook for the class. I mean, because you look at the syllabus and you're like, wait a minute, we only read one chapter of that book. I'm not buying. I think that seeing digital textbooks now be bundled as part of tuition is, to me, a trend that doesn't bode well for students.
It's an interesting conversation. I think it really is, and one that also too, just from my experience at SNSU for the past year, I was previously depending like, well, why can't we just use open information that's available online, and we do that a lot in our courses. But I had no idea the amount of work that goes in when you have, for instance, 180 programs, and then within those you could have links out to things, and links die. You can't just link to a news article and then hope that it's going to stay online forever. And then who's checking those links? And then it's a pretty bad thing if it's the first week of a course, or even if it's halfway through the course and this is a student's first online course and the link is down, and then the teacher's trying to figure out what to do and how can I deliver that same lesson, learning something from somewhere else, and how it impacts the student learning experience. It's been really interesting. I mean, we have a whole team of course architects that do a great job and approach that stuff, but I literally never kind of thought of how difficult it would literally be to scale all the information in the internet if it's not on your own website that you can't manage, and making sure that it's available when it's supposed to be for people. And I think it is interesting that I think the textbooks aren't going away at all, and I think a lot of students aren't terribly interested, you're right. And I think the bundling one is an interesting conversation too, because one of the stats I saw was it could save students 20%. And I was like, well, students using Chegg probably say they save more than 20%, buying something if they're buying a used book too. So there's a lot of space, there's a lot of confusion in the area, even for me, I think, with this one at least.
No, and I think that the article that you mentioned about the textbooks becoming sort of like to fund MOOCs, again, I think we're definitely seeing all sorts of scrambling going on. The publishing industry scrambling to make this transition into a digital world. Universities scrambling to make a transition into a digital world. Everyone's business, I think everyone's sort of worrying about the old business models becoming sort of sustainable into the future. And I'm not sure that some of the things that we see are going to sort of benefit students by saving them money, and I'm not sure that's necessarily the case.
Yeah. So, well, listen, Audrey, as we begin to slowly, wrap up the show, because we're already, well in close to 8 o'clock, I do want to ask one very important question, which is that, one of the reasons I love having the show is because we can really kind of analyze and break down what's been popular, what's trending, and what's really going on. But I definitely don't want to just be obviously negative about what's happening. So, what are some things that excite you that's going on right now in the ed tech space? What are some things that you're really happy about, that you're really optimistic about looking forward? What are things that kind of keep you really, really optimistic and excited for the future?
I'm excited. I am excited. I'm really excited about the potential for technology to be able to connect people in new and powerful ways. I mean, I think it's not just a matter of sort of access to educational content, but I think it's the way in which the internet helps us connect with other people, with other experts, with people that we want to learn from, that aren't necessarily just the professor who's standing in front of the lecture hall, the people that we can learn from all of the time. And I remain incredibly hopeful for the potential for that to definitely change how we learn. I mean, the recognition that you can learn, that expertise is all around us, and that we can sort of find ways to sort of further our own learning and carve our own paths forward in doing so. And I'm also really hopeful that people are going to start sort of paying more attention to their own data. And I think that as things like as things like Twitter sort of start to crumble around us, I do think that as we have access to more and more data about our health records, about our educational records, about what we eat and how far we walk and those sorts of things, I do think we're going to start becoming more aware of our own data. That's actually really empowering, that we can actually sort of not just sort of hand over control to sort of the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world, sort of mine our information. Not just the Mark Zuckerbergs, but I think the Blackboards of the world as well. But I think it can really sort of become empowering and sort of figuring out who we are, how we learn, how we personally learn. So I think that there are definitely things that are going to really empower individual learners to have more agency and make more decisions. But I'm not sure that we can that bundles up nicely and into the App Store.
I definitely think you're right. I definitely don't think it does. But it's exciting to follow and exciting to try and keep up with it. And as someone who tries to, and as this show shows, fails to occasionally, it's hard. I want to thank you too for what you do. I mean, it's really helpful that we at least have someone out there that's writing beyond the headline and really getting into a little bit of the meat of this conversation, or in my case, as the vegetarian, the tofu of the conversation. But it's still an important one to have, and I really appreciate it. So, Audrey, thanks again for once again kind of gracing us with your presence here on Higher Ed Live.
No, thanks. This is always fun.
Awesome. Well, listen, guys, thank you for tuning in for EdTech Roundup. I hope we can probably do it again. Actually, it was really helpful for me, informative. It was informative for you. Let me know. We are back next week with a great show all on the e-expectations survey data from Noel Levitz. It's all about what college-bound teens really think about social media and recruitment in general for higher ed. Very interesting conversation. And then we are also going to be tackling it's Hack NYU, stuff that's going on with NYU social media going on. I think it's going to be hopefully the week after that. We'll get them in the queue and have a couple other shows coming up as well. So it should be really fun. Check it out. As always, you can get all the information over at higheredlive.com. And lastly, just don't forget, we got 2 shows a week besides mine now, 3 total. We have Admissions Live every Tuesday, Student Affairs Live every Wednesday, and Higher Ed Live every Thursday. So we're trying to beef it up, give you all the content we can. Thank you guys as always for watching. I'm Seth Odell, and this is Higher Ed Live.